Yeah, it's Calvin Coolidge. And the better than your last gonna be better than your next one. I'ma marry your mother, you better step, son. People saying that I fell off and shit.
Oh, sorry. Okay, well, we'll stop there. All righty. So that's Calvin Coolidge, y'all. Imagine yet another rap song about somebody kind of distantly somehow connected to the 1920s. Now, unlike that guy, this guy was known as Silent Cal. Silent Cal, because he didn't talk much, right? Now, there's a lot. He's a fascinating guy, let me tell you, because I always believe sort of the typical story, whatever, about Calvin Coolidge. He's actually a fascinating, quite brilliant president in a lot of ways. His stock has been going up a lot in history, but he was always kind of made fun of because he just never talked. But there's a lot of reasons for that. Now, one of the popular jokes of the time was a woman goes to a party that the president's at, President Coolidge. And she goes up to the president. She said, Mr. President, I made a bet with a friend of mine that I could get you to say more than 2 words. And he looks at her and he goes, you lose. Get it? There's only 2 words there. So that was kind of Calvin. Now, the thing that had made him famous is the Boston police strike. He'd been governor of Massachusetts. And if you remember, y'all, right after World War I, 1919, 1920, there had been a lot of strikes in America. A lot of people, a lot of the unions, remember, had not struck because there had been an arbitration group. The labor board would work out things. Well, a lot of people, y'all, were like, hey, prices have gone up. Things have changed. We need to strike. We need more money. Well, that was one thing when it's like, you know, the garbage workers or the steel workers, y'all. But what happens when the police go on strike? That could be awful. What we today call the blue flu, right? All of them get sick and call in at the same time. And he actually broke up the strike. He made them go back to work with the famous words, there can be no right to strike against the public safety by anyone, anywhere, anytime. And that decisive action, y'all, made this guy into a hero of people who were sick of all these strikes. And so he gets to become the nominee for President Harding as his vice president. And when Harding dies, is poisoned or whatever happened to him, Coolidge becomes the new president. Now, he never looked happy. I don't think I've ever seen really a picture of him, y'all, where he isn't frowning. I don't think I've ever seen a picture of him smiling, okay? We know today the man suffered, this is gross, from a lot of problems down there in the intestines, y'all. He had some real stomach issues, and he was usually in some real pain. So if you've ever gone through stuff like that, you know smiling isn't at the top of your list. And so there was that. Also, y'all, this is going to sound weird, but he had a kid die from a tennis injury. Now, I love this story in a way. It's a sad story, but I kind of love it because I used to play tennis in high school, and all my friends made fun of me. Like, oh, yeah, you get hurt out there? You know, any injuries in your contact sport of tennis? And I'm like, do y'all know? Do y'all know that tennis can kill people? What do you mean? Well, Calvin Coolidge had a kid who was playing tennis and got a blister. The blister got infected. It went gangrenous. I guess that's the word. And the kid died from playing tennis. And you say it's not a dangerous sport? People have died. And so, but it broke his heart, y'all, losing this kid in such a silly way. And that troubled him during his presidency. So I think it's kind of unfair when people give him a hard time, man. I would have a hard time. But look at that slogan he had. That has to be the coolest, no pun, well, actually pun intended, the coolest slogan for a president ever. Keep cool with Coolidge. Now, cool in those days, y'all, doesn't mean cool like it does now. And y'all have ever thought that one of those words, you know, the 60s is where we invented the term cool for meaning something that you like. Cool used to mean temperature. Cool used to mean, you know, being calm, like, hey, you need to be cool. You need to calm down, right? That kind of thing. We still use that word, at least Mr. D does, but we don't words like groovy or far out anymore, which Mr. D grew up saying like, man, that is so groovy. That is so far out. That is so fine. That is so tough, right? That's how I grew up talking, sadly. But Coolidge, y'all, keep cool with Coolidge. And that was him, y'all. He didn't let anything fluster him. He didn't make any rash decisions. He stayed pretty calm, and people like that. Now, he gets elected in 1924 on his own, okay? He gets elected in 1924 on his own, and I just realized I made a mistake in the typing down below here in just a sec. He gets elected in 1924 after having been Harding's vice president for a couple of years, actually a year and a half or so, and then being president for most of Harding's term. And he defeats John Davis and progressive Robert La Follette. And as you can see, it's overwhelming. People obviously liked what he and the Republicans were doing. He won everything but the solid Democratic South. Southerners, y'all, voted for anybody as long as they were a Democrat. Could have been a yellow dog. That's where you get the expression, yellow dog Democrats. I'll vote for you as long as you're a Democrat. I don't care if you're a yellow dog Democrat. And that's the way things would be for quite a few years. So that's one of those things you guys just need to know. For much of our history, the South was solidly South, okay? But he's going to do some things that are kind of unpopular, and I'll talk about the reasons for them in just a sec here, y'all. There was this idea that, hey, our soldiers that have come home from World War I, they did a great job. They won the war. We need to give them a big bonus, right? And everybody's like, well, yeah, that'd be awesome, but, you know, we really don't have the money to be giving these guys all $500 or $1,000 or whatever dollars you want to give them. So this is what they came up with. And it's just so phony, y'all. I mean, it'd be like when you're like 5, your parents tell you, when you turn 18, I'm going to buy you whatever car you want. Well, that's great, you know, but that's 13 years from now. And so what they did, y'all, is they said, man, you soldiers did a great job. We're going to reward you. In about 25 years, you know, in 1945, you will get between $500 or $1,000, depending on how long you served, right? Now, what is that money today? Well, that's probably closer to about $6,000 to maybe, I don't know, $11,000 or $12,000. It's not great, but hey, it's a little something, right? It's a nice thing of appreciation. Well, as you guys will see when we talk about the 1930s, this is going to be a disaster because those guys during the Depression say, I ain't waiting to 1945. It's 1932. I'm out of a job. I'm hungry. I want my money now. And they're going to march on Washington, D.C., and it's going to get ugly. We're going to send tanks after them. We're going to send cavalry soldiers, and it's going to hurt his successor, Hoover. And it's going to be the last thing and the last nail in his coffin to get Hoover unelected. But why did he do this? He didn't want to spend the money. He thought that was just a wasteful thing to do. And it wasn't even going to come out of his budget. It was 25 years down the road. And then there was also something called the McNary-Hogan bill, all right? The idea behind this, and you'll see why we needed it, is they wanted farmers, y'all. Farmers were really hurting after World War I. They're one of the few groups who didn't do well. The idea would be the government would buy the excess food that these farmers grew, the excess grain, all that stuff, and that way farmers could still get paid when people weren't buying their stuff as much anymore. Ultimately, we are going to start doing that, but not under Calvin Coolidge's watch. And once again, why? He didn't think it was a good idea. It costs money, which means you got to get taxes for it, which means it's going to hurt. But whether you liked Coolidge or agreed with his policies, one thing people could say was he was an honest guy, all right? He was a moral person. No one ever found any dirt on this guy, okay? And why was that a big deal? Well, remember Harding, the guy who'd fathered a child in the White House, the guy who'd had these affairs, this guy who's everybody that worked for him had stolen money intended for our vets, had stolen oil intended for our Navy. This guy didn't do any of that, and he wouldn't pardon those people, y'all. He made sure they resigned. He did his best to get at least some jail time for those folks. So that was a big deal. All right, now this is blocked out, and this should say 1928, not 1924. Now, we didn't have the 10-year limit that we do now, or the two-term limits of the 22nd Amendment. Theoretically, he could have, and he was popular enough, y'all, that he chose not to run. He could have run in 1928, but he chose not to. And he did it in perfectly traditional Calvin Coolidge way. Okay, yeah, if I hit this, though, it says he chose not to run for re-election. What it says underneath the banner, y'all, if I tell it not to do this, I guarantee it's going to lose the PowerPoint. It happens when I do it. So I apologize for that. I shouldn't put stuff this low on PowerPoints, but yeah. So what this says underneath it is chose not to run for re-election in 1928 is what it says. And the way he did it, y'all, was he called a press conference, which was kind of a new thing, and he passed out a piece of paper, and it said, I will not run for president in 1928. And that's all he said. He didn't take questions. He didn't do anything. He was silent, Cal, right to the end. Okay, so once again, he chose not to run for re-election in 1928. Not that you need to know that, but understand, he could have been president, y'all, in 28 through 32. And probably a good thing he wasn't, y'all, because the crash that leads to the Depression happens in 29. He got out just in time, right? Maybe that's why he knew it. Oh, it's not showing a picture here, y'all. There should be a picture here of a Native American and of Calvin Coolidge wearing a Sioux war bonnet. Now, that's got some background to it. In 1924, something called the Wheeler Act was passed. The Wheeler Act, y'all, made Native Americans finally into citizens. You know, they could vote, they could do all that. Imagine that, y'all. First people here, but the last people to get to actually be citizens. So the Wheeler Act went into effect, and he was out visiting a Native American reservation, and they gave him one of these beautiful, beautiful war bonnets. So he put it on his head, y'all, and they took the picture. And he looked, I gotta say, he looked foolish. And from that point on, and you can see the picture, it's on your notes, he looks just silly. I mean, you know, Native American looks good in a war bonnet. This dude, not so good. And so presidents have learned from that, y'all. You don't put on a hat that you haven't tried before. Because if you do, you might just look stupid like Coolidge did on that day in 1924. And I'll just share another story with you, y'all. You know, I've studied the Kennedy assassination to a ridiculous amount. And the night before Kennedy was assassinated, he went to Fort Worth, Texas. He spent the night there, and the next morning they had sort of a breakfast brunch for him before he would then take the flight to Dallas where, spoiler alert, he would be shot to death in a limousine. Well, being Texas, what do you think we gave President Kennedy? A big hat and a pair of boots, big cowboy boots, right? Got to have some cowboy boots if you're in Texas, and a big 10-gallon hat. And so they're like, put it on, JFK. And he's like, and of course, Kennedy had that accent. He's like, I will put this on when I get back to the White House on Sunday. You guys can see me then with the hat on. Well, of course, he wasn't alive when he got back, and he never got to wear that hat. Maybe if he'd had that hat on that day, he might have survived. The guy in front of him, Governor Connolly, who also got shot, he had the hat on and he lived. Hat might have saved his life. Thanks, Coolidge. You killed a president. Okay, but there you go. More stuff about Coolidge. He was very educated. He'd gone to Amherst College, one of the great, great colleges of the country up in the Northeast. Here you can see things like, for example, honesty, frugal. Frugal is a nice word for being cheap, y'all. In fact, if you guys are ever out on a date, which hopefully you guys do, I don't know anymore what people do, but hey, you're out on a date and you take the girl, you take the guy to a cheap restaurant. They're like, man, you're so cheap. You say, honey, I ain't cheap. I'm frugal, meaning I'm careful with my money. It's a nice way to say it. And he believed in limited government. He wanted to protect the rights of people who had made their own money. He gets rid of those people during the Harding administration who were corrupt. He pursues those suspected of crimes. He won't pardon those who were convicted, okay? So he really helped make people feel good about government again and to trust him. And occasionally, y'all, that will happen. When we have a particularly nasty, awful president who is corrupt and everything, we tend to vote for somebody who is just the opposite of that, or at least we hope is, that will fix that. Property rights, he cut taxes 4 times. He gave people a free hand to invest, produce, make a profit. He believed in trickle-down economics. And when you look at this, y'all, the economy did work. Industrial production up 70%. Gross national product, the sum of everything we make, 40%. Per capita income, every person, y'all, on average, saw their income go up by 30%. So this is why we call it the Roaring Twenties. It did go pretty well. Right? Soviet Revolution or Communist Revolution in Russia, a lot of general strikes throughout the country that kind of paralyzed work for a little while, paralyzed the country. And then remember this, right? This event, the Wall Street bombing of 1920, right? 40 people died. Worst terrorist attack, y'all, until Oklahoma City in the 1990s that killed over 150 people. Of course, both of those pale in comparison to what happens on September 11th, right? When a couple thousand people or more die in New York City. But the panic's the same, y'all. The panic, the craziness of trying to find out who did this and how do we stop this from happening again? Suspected communists were put on something called the Red Ark. 250 of them were actually deported. Now these were immigrants to this country. We intended to take them to Russia, but instead, y'all, they were dropped off at in Finland because Russia would not take them. We also talked and told the story of Sacco and Vanzetti, 2 Italian immigrants who were also members of, who supported anarchy, right? The idea of no government. After a robbery in Massachusetts in which 2 people were killed, these men were arrested. They may have been guilty, they may not have been guilty, but one thing for sure, they didn't get a fair trial. And ultimately, they were executed. Yeah, electrocuted. And so I showed you guys that little video yesterday. And then remember too, y'all, their case is very similar to the second Red Scare, what happens to Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who Julius convinced his brother-in-law, his wife's brother, David Greenglass, to share atomic bomb secrets that helped the Russians get the atomic bomb probably anywhere between 3 to 5 years sooner, right? Now, other spies were more guilty in getting more information, but it is the Rosenberg, y'all, who alone pay the full price in hopes that he would confess and name other people. The pressure was put on his wife. They said, we'll execute your wife. She's involved if you don't help us. Well, guess what? He chose to stay silent. He didn't confess. In fact, he claimed he was innocent. She claimed she was innocent all the way to the point where they too, like Sacco and Vanzetti, were executed by electricity. They were electrocuted to death. You may remember the story that she did not die instantly. They had to recharge the electric bolts, do it 3 more times, and steam appeared from this woman. And what made it even more tragic is they were father and mother of 2 little beautiful boys. Now, this case, just like Sacco and Vanzetti, y'all, was something that people all over the world, mainly left people on the left side of the political spectrum, were upset about. Some people claimed that people were targeting because they were communists. Some people said they were targeting the Rosenbergs because they were Jewish, just like some people said they were going after Sacco and Vanzetti because they were Italians, because they were anarchists, right? And so this was a cause celeb all around the country. And then also, too, y'all, remember the Socialist Labor Union, the IWW. Members of the IWW, y'all, were often attacked. They were beaten and even lynched. After somebody took a shot, apparently from the IWW building at a passing parade of American Legionnaires, they went after some of the IWW guys, and one of them was beaten. They threw him off a bridge 3 times with a noose on his head, sexually mutilated him, and finally killed the man, right? So it could get real, y'all. That's what I'm saying. It could get real nasty. Now, the other thing to mention here, y'all, are the Palmer raids. Now, A. Mitchell Palmer was pretty much an easygoing kind of guy. He was a Quaker after all. Quakers are usually pretty easygoing people. They don't like war or anything like that. But when the terrorist attacks came literally to his doorstep, when somebody, sent a bomb that detonated in his front of his house, okay, what ends up happening is he goes medieval, y'all. He orders the arrest of of Reds. Okay, Reds are communists, right? Or people we believe to be communists. 2,600 people get arrested. 700 just in New York. We deport lots of people, right, who have the wrong beliefs. Now, this just kind of follows through and continues a lot of the intolerance, the German hysteria, the espionage and sedition acts against people who were fighting the draft of World War I. And it's kind of a very intolerant time for a lot of people who have the wrong beliefs. Now, we kind of forget about it, though, when the Great Crash comes and we get the Depression. People kind of had bigger fish to fry. Now we get to the stuff that I've not talked at all about yet, and this is incredibly important both for STAR and for AP. So if you haven't been listening, this is the time to really start. Now, it's called the monkey trial, or the Scopes monkey trial, okay? Now, the reason it's called the monkey trial, y'all, is it involved evolution. Now, people that have a superficial kind of knowledge of evolution think it says, oh, you mean my great-great-granddaddy was a monkey? Is that what you're saying, right? Well, of course, it's not that. It does say that man developed from a more primitive type of primate over, millions of years and that kind of thing. But, people said, oh, you're saying we came from monkeys is what you're saying. Now, this was the trial of the century. Now, that was only in the 1920s. It turned out, y'all, we had a lot more trials of the century, but it was a big thing. Now, I gave you guys a little comic book reading about this that I urge you to read to get some more details, but this is not an accident. Lots of times, y'all, this is portrayed as just like, hey, out of the blue, this dude was teaching evolution, and he got busted, and there was a trial. Well, it was a setup, y'all. This was planned from the beginning, and maybe not till all the way to the end. I don't think they knew how far it would go. But this guy, y'all, John T. Scopes, was a science teacher, biology teacher in a high school. He was also the tennis coach. So my tennis coach, y'all, was also my biology teacher. So I always kind of felt like, a connection with John T. Scopes here. Now, he was a member of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. And they didn't like the fact that Tennessee had a law on the books, not really an enforced law, but they had a law that said teaching evolution can get you in trouble, can get you fined, okay? Now, there are lots of crazy laws, y'all, still on the books today. Most of them not enforced. And I call them kind of feel-good laws. Somebody sometime passed this law to make people say, oh, I feel better. There's a law against that now, okay? But they wanted to challenge this law. So he agreed, y'all, to teach evolution in class, to be arrested. They had people show up like, hey, Mr. Scopes, you're teaching evolution. Come with me, And so they thought it would kind of result in a trial. That would then result in maybe a case where, the law would be declared unconstitutional, thrown off the books. But it got so much bigger than that, y'all. Little did they know what they really had started. Because a lot of people that were very religious, y'all, really felt their religion, the way they viewed the world, was under threat. And so this is going to get much bigger than anybody ever imagined. So who are the two sides? You got Darwin's theory of evolution, right? All right. And you've got
Glory, hallelujah.
the Bible fighting and coming across each other. And I don't know, and I don't want to get into your personal religious beliefs or not, that's your own thing. But I know in my life, y'all, I've wrestled with my knowledge of science and my own religious beliefs and tried in some way to accommodate them. I think a lot of us do that. But the fundamentalists, y'all, as you guys will see later on another slide, they were much more literal. The Bible is true, every word of it, right? It says God created the earth in 7 days. He did 7 days, right? Or 6 days, and he rested on the seventh. They are much more literal that way. And they, as I said, really saw their ideas under stress. Now, it pits two of the most famous men, two of my favorite Americans, against each other. And one of them will die. That's right. William Jennings Bryan will not live very long after it. He will be used up and basically wiped out and will die shortly. I think of a broken heart, broken spirit, everything. But he does win the case, right? Now, Clarence Darrow will represent Scopes. He is the lawyer for the defendant. William Jennings Bryan is the prosecutor. He is the guy going after Scopes for having taught evolution. Now, when it's all said and done, y'all, Scopes is found guilty, but they overturn the fine that he had to pay on a technicality. So who really wins? Who loses? Well, Dayton, Tennessee, where this happened, y'all, made a lot of money, people coming to see this trial. Some people think that was one of the reasons they did the whole thing, like, hey, we need some tourism. Let's have this big trial. Everybody and their mother will come to see the trial. Well, they sure did. But the trouble is, y'all, Dayton was made to look like complete ignoramuses, right? Like complete morons, or worse than a moron, a lesson, right? And so they just looked really bad. But it is one of the most important cases. Now, I want to talk about the two people involved. First, the prosecutor, William Jennings Bryan. Now, he is the prosecutor in the trial. He wears himself out. And the sad thing is, y'all, he and Clarence Darrow had been on the same side in a lot of things in American history. They both favored the little guy lots of times. But their friendship is destroyed in this trial. Literally, y'all, Clarence Darrow puts William Jennings Bryan on the witness stand and proceeds to just humiliate him. Bryan, y'all, had most of the Bible memorized, or a good chunk of it. And so he points out contradictions in the Bibles and humiliates them and does a lot of things to him. And it's really kind of sad to see. Now, William Jennings Bryan before had been a guy who'd run for president 3 different times and lost. He ran as a populist / Democrat for the Populist Party and for the Democratic Party. The most famous time being 1896. Now, how he became famous, y'all, was the speech called the Cross of Gold speech. Now, if you remember your populists, and Mr. D will admit, we did not cover them in the detail I would have liked. Populists, y'all, were generally farmers. They wanted the government to really take over things like the railroads, the banks. They wanted the government to coin more silver money. Now, the thing is, y'all, money is valuable because it's rare. If you print too much of it or coin too much of it, its value is going to decrease and you're going to get inflation. Well, you and I don't like seeing prices go up. But on the other hand, y'all, if I'm a farmer or I'm a debtor, and oftentimes the two go together, and I owe a lot of money, if the government coins silver, that means there's a greater chance that I'll get some money, gold or silver, and I can pay back my debts. And if there's inflation, cool. I'm paying back my debts with inflated money. In other words, I made money off of the loan. And so this is one of the big things populists wanted, was bimetallism, okay? Now that you're gone, or cross of gold. All that's left of the dreams I hold is the band of gold. Anyway, okay, Free to Pain. Great, great song, y'all. But anyway, so he demanded the coining of silver. Now, here's his famous campaign ad. There he is. He's pretty young. No cross of gold. No crown of thorns. Obviously, he's using religious imagery, right, of Jesus. Jesus, if you remember the story from the New Testament, had a crown of thorns pressed on his head and had been crucified, right? So he sees having only one type of, monometallism, I guess that's the word for it, only having gold as sort of crucifying farmers, crucifying mankind. And his famous line from his speech is, "You shall not press down upon this brow of labor, this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind on a cross of gold." Okay? Very, very powerful speaker, y'all. And a lot of people love this guy, but not enough to ever make him president. He ran 3 times and didn't get it. And here you see a picture of him personified with that cross of gold. Here's the crown of thorns. Here's the cross of gold. And literally, he is standing on the Bible for support. The Bible is supporting him in this, okay? Now, Clarence Darrow had been always the lawyer, y'all, that defended the cases that nobody wanted. You guys know that sometimes, let's think about, like, for example, that guy, the cop, Chauvin, y'all, that kneeled on George Floyd, right? And George Floyd died as a result, most likely, okay, that we saw that this summer. All right, that guy. Can you imagine being a lawyer for that cop? How much people probably hate you for doing that? But what Clarence Darrow would have said, he would have defended that cop, y'all, because he would say, those are the people who need defending more than anybody else. They're the ones that aren't going to get a fair trial because we are all so angry. So he would support, y'all, people that nobody else would in trials. Most famous lawyer of his time. And like I said, here you see a picture in better days, at the trial when Darrow and he were friends. Eugene Debs. Nobody wanted to support Debs. The guy was a socialist. He was opposed to World War I. Well, Clarence Darrow supported him. And there you see the two. Also, y'all, he defended these 2 guys. Now, there were probably no 2 people more, y'all, hated in the 1920s than these 2 kids, Leopold and Loeb, okay? But I think it's an important thing to talk about in the 1920s. Plus, it lets Mr. D talk a little bit about true crime, which is one of his and your future AP English teacher, Miss Alexander's, favorite topics. That is true crime. But anyway, y'all, these were 2 genius kids. Literally, y'all, their IQs were in the genius level. And the IQ test was something fairly new. Plus, they were pretty rich. They were from very privileged families. So what do they do with all those talents and money? Well, they decide to kill somebody because they want to see, are they smart enough to get away with murder? Now, is that sick or is that sick? I think the answer is that's sick. And so what they did, y'all, is they found this little boy. Okay, he was 14 years old, named Bobby Franks. They kidnapped him, they molested him, and eventually they tortured and killed the kid. Okay, for no reason except to see that they could do it. This wasn't a robbery, this wasn't any kind of thing. It was purely just a sadistic, sad thing to do. Well, nobody wanted Leopold and Loeb to even have a trial, y'all. Hang him, kill him. We shouldn't even wait. Clarence Darrow picked up the case. Now, he wasn't able to get them off. The evidence was too clear because these smart guys, y'all, one of them had left his glasses at the murder site. Well, his glasses were designer glasses. Nobody else, except maybe 2 or so other people, had those same type of glasses. That's how they nailed the brilliant guy. Now, but what he did do was keep them from being electrocuted. They ended up spending their life. One of them died in prison. One eventually was released years later. I even remember the one that died in prison. I'm old enough, y'all, to remember when he died. And not a lot of people shed a tear for those guys. Now, why is this a big deal? Why do we talk about this? It was incidents like this, y'all, where a lot of Americans said, what the heck is happening to our country? If a good little kid can be killed just for the heck of it and tortured, what's the matter with our society? Our morals must be messed up. And why is that? Well, people aren't reading the Bible, or people aren't doing this, or it's the movies that are teaching bad things. And one of the big things of the 20s, y'all, is this feeling that people thought, man, our country's in danger. And you had a lot of pushback to a lot of the changes that were happening. And that's the next thing, y'all, were the immigration restrictions. Now, for much of American history, we had let anybody in that got here, as long as they weren't mentally, challenged, as long as they were obviously going to be able to care for themselves, get a good paying job, and not be a burden to society. And we didn't like it if they were considered a little too radical in some of their political beliefs. Now, in the 1890s, we began to get a new wave of people. These people were from Southern Europe, Eastern Europe. They didn't speak English or English, kind of languages similar to English like German. They weren't Protestant. They tended to be Catholic or Jewish or Orthodox Christian. And so some people were not comfortable with these people coming there. And so this wave of them continues. Now, when it turns out, y'all, that a number of the anarchists were indeed Italians, like the Wall Street bomber was an Italian guy. When it turns out many of the communists are Eastern Europeans, y'all, or from Russia, many Americans are like, oh, see, do we really want these people coming here, messing up, doing all this stuff? And look at the way an immigrant is portrayed in this picture from the 1920s, y'all. This immigrant is being let in. We've opened the door, right? We're not restricting him from coming in. He's literally labeled undesirable. But what is his head, y'all? He is literally a walking bomb. And it is lit, y'all. It is burning as we go. By the time he gets in, it's not going to be long before he blows up and takes out how many ever Americans. Obviously, the person who did this cartoon does not want these type of immigrants, which he basically associates with terrorism, right? Now, these were Southern and Eastern Europeans rather than the Northern ones, and this is what we were fearful of. We wanted America to stay WASP, and Mr. D hates his WASP, right? I am so allergic to wasp, y'all. I swell up like, I don't know, a watermelon when I get bit by a wasp. It's not pleasant at all. But what they did, y'all, was basically they said, let's make America like it was in 1910. So we're only going to let in the same percentage of, we're going to set a number, how many people we're going to let in. And let's say 3% of our population in 1910 was Italian, okay? 3% of the people we're going to let in are going to be Italian. Now, 20% of our country was Irish. Okay, cool. 20% of the people we'll let in be Irish. Well, what if Irish people aren't coming? Well, still, we're going to reserve those slots for them, okay? Then they went further, y'all. In 1924, they take it one more step. In 1924, they say 1910 wasn't good enough. Let's go back before we started getting this new immigration. Let's go back to 1890, 20 years before. And so this was a way, y'all, to try to turn back the clock, to try to make America look the way it had looked 20, 30 years before, okay? And it's important to remember that. That often comes up on AP tests. Now, and here you see the Emergency Quota Act of 1921. As I said, there would be a later one in 1924, right? In 1924, which would go back to 1890. Now, another term you guys need to make sure you're aware of is nativism. Nativism means basically America for Native Americans. But I don't mean Native Americans as in Indians, the first people to come here way back in the day. I'm talking about America for people born in America. Now, your parents, your grandparents might have been an immigrant, but now that you were here, you were born here, you didn't want other people to come. That is nativism. America for Americans only, okay? Now, so that's a rebirth of it. Now, the group more than any other that represented nativism at its worst was, of course, the KKK, or as I like to call it, the Klan 2.0. Because we'd had a Klan, y'all remember, during Reconstruction after the Civil War. but it was relatively limited to the South. It was also relatively focused on African Americans and white Southern republics, the scalawags, as they called them, teachers who tried to teach the former slaves how to read and write, okay? And so that Klan, y'all, had basically ended with the Ku Klux Acts and some of those things and had faded away. But then, y'all, comes the movie Birth of a Nation in 1915. Now, it took a while, but people began to start saying, wow, the Klan, maybe that's the solution to our problems today. Because the Klan in Birth of a Nation had been portrayed as very heroic, saving Southerners from the Yankees and carpetbaggers and all those kind of evil people. So when people start watching Birth of a Nation, you start seeing the Klan come back again. But this Klan, y'all, was going to be much bigger than the first Klan after Reconstruction. This Klan, y'all, wanted to move to other parts of the country. Well, there weren't many blacks, say, in Indiana or in Ohio or in Illinois. So, why would you want to have a Klan if that's what your job is to do, is to go after the blacks? So they expanded their hatred. I don't know if that makes them less prejudiced or more prejudiced. They hated more people now. It's like somebody once said of the character on TV, Archie Bunker, who was a comical racist character. And you were supposed to learn about the evils of racism by listening to him. But people used to say of Archie, oh, Archie's not racist. He hates everybody, right? Well, this Klan kind of hates everybody, y'all. If you were an immigrant, they disliked you. If you were a Catholic, as most of the new immigrants were from Italy or Spain, they hated you. If you were Jewish, they hated you. If you were a communist, they hated you. If you were a pacifist, they hated you. If you were a bootlegger, you made illegal booze to get around prohibition, they hated you. If you were a gambler, they hated you. If you were a supporter of birth control like Margaret Sanger, they hated you. Why? Well, because if white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Americans used birth control, that would mean that these other people that were coming over would soon outnumber us. We had a duty to keep having kids to be able to stay ahead of them, is how they viewed it, y'all. And that's just a few of the people. I mean, imagine, y'all, if you were a Jewish immigrant who also liked to gamble, favored birth control, and were a communist. Man, they really might dislike you. Or if you were a pacifistic Catholic who was an immigrant and liked to gamble. I mean, wow. Now, ultimately, the Klan got up to 4 million people. They had marches openly through the streets of Washington, D.C. And like I said, they just weren't something in the South, y'all. In the 1920s, the Klan was in the Midwest, states like Indiana, Illinois, Ohio. And in fact, y'all, Indiana had the biggest Klan group of any. There was even a woman's KKK, a WKKK. But eventually, y'all, this Klan will fade away, mainly because of some scandals. There was a lot of money being there. People were giving money, donating money, and that was too tempting for some people. And there was money irregularities, financial scandals. And then there was a sexual scandal. The leader of the Klan in Indiana raped and killed a woman. That did not obviously go over very well either. So the Klan 2.0 fades away. In the 1950s, during the African American Civil Rights Movement, you'll see Klan 3.0. And then, y'all, in the 70s and 80s, kind of Klan 4.0. And in this area, I hate to say it, y'all, but the Klan of the 70s targeted Vietnamese people. Particularly Vietnamese fishermen was one of their targets in Seabrook and Kemah and that. And it was crazy. And then, of course, we even have a more recent version. Now, the most interesting group, I think, in the 1920s are what happens with the ladies, right? Women in the 1920s. Now, more than any group, women are going to undergo a transformation in the 1920s. Now, these are what are called flappers, and you're going to see some videos of these young girls. There you see them just dancing away. Notice them smoking, wearing very, quote, by their standards, in revealing bathing suits. Here's the crazy wing walkers that people used to do. Women on motorcycles. Do not try this at home. These ladies are professionals. Now, Now that's the cloche hat that was very popular when ladies. Cloche means belle, right? Check out those bathing suits, y'all. Now you would have never seen women in that before the 1920s. Check out the cute haircuts. That was called the bob. Now my name's Bob, and they named this haircut because Bob likes the haircut. But it is a really cute hairstyle, and it's very different from what women had done before. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why, right? Now dancing to jazz music, right? Oh man, check out that headdress. Oh, that is awesome. Now that's Tex Guinan. She ran one of the most popular speakeasies, y'all. She would greet people with the phrase, "Hello, suckers." The cameras were hand cranked. Didn't quite have motors yet. No alcohol was involved in this gentleman's craziness. Now, so I don't want you to think all women were flappers. It's just like the hippies in the 1960s. You know, everybody's like, "Mr. D, were you a hippie?" I'm like, "Yeah, I was a 4-year-old hippie, okay?" Or 5-year-old hippie or whatever in the 60s. This was a small part of the population, but of course it's interesting and it was very different. So it gets a lot more coverage. Most women, y'all, maybe gradually they adopted some of the flapper culture, but most women kind of slowly, only slowly changed and adopted these things. Now here I found a lovely picture here of a flapper in a very kind of characteristic outfit from the time. And so here are the characteristics of flappers. And this is a very, very different thing. For one thing, y'all, women cut their hair short. Now that's not a big thing today, but women cut their hair short, y'all, because during World War I, when they were working in the factories, long hair could cause real problems. It could get caught in the machinery and tear your scalp off, pull you into the machine, which is not a good thing. And so women in the factories began to cut their hair short. Okay. The next thing, y'all, they would wear very kind of short, revealing dresses. This was because of a fabric shortage during World War I. Remember, if you watch my women's history lecture, I talk about the clothes. You know, women used to wear these multiple layers, y'all, of dresses, and they used to wear these corsets that would push up their breast and also make their, butt stick out, because that was considered the feminine form to have. Big here, and somehow, miraculously, y'all, narrow here. It's easy to get big down here. Mr. D can attest to that, right? But a little bit harder to be big in both places and somehow narrow there. So they would wear these tight corsets, okay? And that was considered to be the ideal woman. Well, in the 20s, y'all, women start wearing more revealing dresses. And, just to kind of show you the changes here, women aren't, expected to have the larger breasts. They're expected to have kind of more the boy figure. And they will even go to the point, y'all, of literally taping down their breasts, trying to flatten them to get more sort of that little girl or young boy look. I don't know what's up with that, but that's how it was. And this was all a part, y'all, of women trying to distinguish themselves from their mothers and their grandmothers, okay? It was trying to say, I'm not you, I'm different, okay? Also, women began to smoke cigarettes, not cigars, although some might do that. They would smoke cigarettes, oftentimes on the little kind of, holders here, right? And of course, women, as I was mentioning, begin to drink alcohol. Here you see this young lady having a nice little flute of champagne, right? And of course, dancing, going out to clubs, dancing, experimenting with sex and driving and all those kind of things. it was very different. Now, I know, that might be closer to how we are today. And this is really, if you're a lady today, these women, were the ones that were the trailblazers for a lot of maybe the characteristics today, the independence that you ladies enjoy today. And as of course, like I said, this was really helped during World War I, when women had cut their hair short. The material shortage meant wearing, less clothes, not having all of that. And of course, remember the automobile, which gives them the freedom to do this. And, motion pictures, magazines are going to display the Hollywood people. And it's like today, y'all, a lot of you ladies and guys will read the magazines or read them online. You'll see the movies and the TV shows, and you're like, hey, I want to dress like that person. And so when movies become more popular, and like I said, magazines were more easily published, you're going to see women trying to be like those, okay? And you ladies have so many more different ways you can change and look. Us guys, there's only so much we can do, right? But you ladies, there's many, many, many ways to be unique and amazing. All right, y'all. So I'm going to try to wrap up here part one. I'm working on part two, the notes and the PowerPoint and the slides and all of that. It's you guys know, you heard me gripe about it before. It's a lot of work, but I love it, hate it at the same time, if you know what I mean. And 20s are a neat time, and I'm really glad I'm getting to talk to y'all about it. Last year, I didn't get to do it with students because of the COVID, so it's kind of fun for me to get to do that. And we're into one of the more interesting parts. Now, as I was saying, a lot of people began to wonder, what the heck's happening with our country during the 1920s? The Leopold and Loeb murder of Bobby Franks and stuff like that. And also, people began to get worried about women. They were changing, right? And mores, and that's how you say it. It looks like changing mores, but it's changing mores, morals, basically. And so, things have really begun to sort of change what's right and what's wrong. A lot of people have been made criminals by prohibition, for example. People who weren't criminals were now, in fact, criminals if they were drinking and selling and doing alcohol and stuff like that. So yeah, many Americans changed their notions of what's traditionally right or wrong. Like we said, prohibition turned people into criminals, right? And that happens when when you're seeing people like yourself being arrested for what you think is kind of silly stuff, you start to see a loss in respect for law and order. And people like Al Capone openly flaunted the law. Cops were openly bribed with all the money available during Prohibition, right? And so you see just a general lack of respect for law and order, okay? Now, the car we've already talked about quite a bit, and especially after Cadillac, y'all, makes the first self-starter car. The woman didn't have to get there and turn the crank and do everything she could trying to get it going. She could just, put the keys in and start it up, and she could go out without what were called chaperones. Now, back in the day, when women went out, they had to have like a much older sister, an aunt, grandparent, or somebody with them to make sure that they didn't get in trouble. Well, with the car, y'all, with the minimum amount of training, the ladies could get in a car and they could go to parties and stuff. Now, one of the things is we're really going to see a rise in premarital sex. Now, Mr. D's pretty naive, but I'm not naive enough to think that, this stuff never happened, right? That people never did that kind of stuff before marriage. But it really starts to increase a lot during the 1920s, especially among the young people. They would go to parties, they would get into a corner, the jazz music would be playing, the hard liquor would be flowing, right, for men and women. And they would start, and they were called petting parties and necking parties where, Roman hands and Russian fingers and, all kinds of crazy stuff like that. And this is told in the novels, particularly of F. Scott Fitzgerald. And of course, the movies, y'all, are not really going to be edited, or I don't want to say censored. There's not going to be a certain, and I'll talk about this when I talk about movies, there's not going to be the motion picture production code kind of thing, the Hays Code as it was called yet. And the early movies of the 20s, y'all, this is before they had sound, were pretty doggone graphic, right? And so you see people kind of emulating what's in the movies, then the movie emulates what people are doing, and it's like a vicious circle or cycle kind of thing going on here. Now, Sigmund Freud, who was the great Austrian psychiatrist, or psychologist or whatever. Anyway, Mr. D's never gotten that straight. But anyway, you guys may have heard of him in Mr. Reed's class, for example. He talked a lot about sex, and he said, sex, repressing sex, is going to lead to emotional problems, nervous problems. So you should just, do it, right? And so a lot of people are like, hey, that's some advice I could follow. And so you start seeing more people doing that kind of thing. Also, y'all, contraceptives. Now, they're pretty basic at the time. You don't have the pill yet, and I don't want to get into all that stuff, but contraceptives start being a little bit more common instead of, more natural methods of birth control, which once again, I don't want to get into, but you do start seeing artificial methods. And the woman most famous for this is Margaret Sanger, okay? She spent most of her life, y'all, arguing for women's right to have access to birth control. And it used to be actually illegal. I mean, you get busted for having this kind of stuff, or even, y'all, mailing information through the mail to women about it, or sending birth control things. And she really believed that women should have the right to control their reproduction, how many children they want to have, that they shouldn't have to always worry about sex resulting possibly in having children. Okay, and because of this, she was controversial. She was thrown in jail multiple times. A lot of people thought she was trying to doom, quote, the white race or other people or other groups like that. So you start seeing this being made more available, and therefore people could do this without, like I said, necessarily the risk of having children. And also, y'all, divorce has become easier. Now, divorce is never easy. Mr. D can speak of it, having gone through 10 or 12 myself. No. Just one, but that was enough, right? It's miserable for everybody involved, y'all, and it's never easy. But it was easier, right, for women to get divorces. No longer did you have to prove all kinds of things, being beaten, abandoned, infidelity, all that stuff. It began to get easier. And so because of that, y'all, you're going to see the divorce rate start going up in the 20s. At first, it was only 1 out of 8 marriages. Then it's going to go to 1 to 6. Today, y'all, and this is somewhat skewed because some people, y'all, do have like 4, 5, 6 marriages, and they kind of skew it for those of us who hopefully will have only 1 or 2. But, today it's anywhere between 1 out of 2 and 1 out of 3. And as we know, y'all's generation is a little less likely, apparently, to get married, or you get married later, you have the children, then you get married. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I'm saying that seems to be sort of the trend. So you're kind of seeing that start to happen during this time. Now, of course, this bothered some people, right, in the 1920s. What was happening to our women? They're going out independently. They're getting drunk. They're using birth control. They're doing all these kind of things. And so religion is going to really feel under threat. And there's really kind of 2 branches of faith in the 1920s. Now, for example, y'all, the modernists who were trying to reconcile science and Christianity. Remember how I mentioned the Scopes monkey trial? These people tried to find a way to accommodate their religion and science. And, well, maybe the Bible wasn't literal. Maybe it meant this. Maybe a day is 1 billion years or something, in creation or something. They tried to come up with explanations. And here you see an example of one of those guys. His name was Fendick or Fosdick. I'm not sure, but you don't need to know that. But Harry, there we go, Harry Fosdick. You can see that. Interesting name. But anyway, he was a modernist, okay? Now, your fundamentalists, y'all, well, they believed literally the Bible was true. Every word of the Bible was literally true, okay? God indeed had created the earth in 6 days, as the opening book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, told us, right? And so you're going to see a struggle between these groups, people that feel their faith is under attack by the new science, by the new mores, all that kind of stuff. And many people began to believe, the more fundamentalists believe modernists were wrecking their religion. They saw modernists were responsible for the decline in morals, for the decline in society. They're the people responsible for things like Leopold and Loeb and the terrible murder and all this kind of stuff that was happening. Okay. Now, you had a series of popular preachers, and I'm going to mention a couple of these. There, I find them interesting. One's name was Billy Sunday. Now, I don't know about y'all, but what a great name for a preacher, right? Because, you know, Christians usually go to church on Sundays. Now, he was a former baseball player, and he went after gambling. He went after drinking, you know, and there was plenty of both happening, and dancing. And he would have these large revivals as he traveled around the country. Now, something I may not, well, I'm going to mention it a little bit here, but radio plays a key too, right? No longer do people have to physically go to church. They can listen to it on the radio. And at night, y'all, radio waves travel incredibly far across the country, right? Now, another popular person at the time was Amy Semple McPherson. Okay. Now, here you see a picture of her, and I don't know what's up with the picture behind. I must have screwed up something there. But anyway, and my mom actually saw her as a young girl out in California. She went to see her at her great, what was it, the Foursquare Gospel, I think is what it was. Now, what my mom says she would do is they would literally, she would be lowered down onto the floor, y'all, with these massive sleeves here. And with the way the lights and everything were done, it was as if an angel were descending onto the stage. Now, she was very anti-communist, right? And she would give these presentations on radio. And she was also the first, y'all, to build what today we would call mega churches, where not hundreds, but thousands of people could gather. And she had a church out in LA, and this is a picture of what it was. So you start seeing sort of not just mass culture, but mass religion. I'm not saying the little churches with, you know, their 20, 50, couple hundred people are dying out by any means, but you're seeing other people gravitate towards this sort of religion for the masses that Billy Sunday, but especially people like Amy Semple McPherson personified. By the way, she was involved in a weird sort of thing, y'all, where she disappeared and people thought, oh my gosh, the modernist, the communist, somebody is kidnapped, like, you know, Amy. Well, it turns out, y'all, Amy was kind of, you know, having, let's just say, a little affair on the side, and had kind of engineered her own disappearance to kind of hang out with this guy. At least that's the story I heard, but, you know, don't want to gossip or anything. But anyway, so religion, y'all, definitely undergoes some interesting changes. Now, what we're going to be looking at in part 2, which I hope to start tomorrow, or definitely on, what is the next day, Thursday, I'm going to go over some of the movie stars. I'm going to go over the Black, you know, Harlem Renaissance, talk about jazz, talk about some interesting topics there. And of course, the giant sports figures, because just like radio, y'all, and this is something else AP expects you guys to know, radio really kind of starts creating, like I said, this mass culture where, you know, we all kind of start acting more alike, talking more alike, and there's sort of a national culture instead of, well, you know, there's Houston and there's San Antonio or this Texas thing, and that's going to be very different if you go out to LA or you go to New York or Chicago. You start seeing with mass culture, y'all, you're making people more like each other. And you're even going to see, not that accents have disappeared, y'all, but they aren't as pronounced anymore because you guys hear people on radio from New York or LA or whatever. They hear you guys. And yeah, we still have accents. We still have little regional differences, but mass culture, and that's going to be radio, and it's going to be the movies, y'all, especially when sound comes along. That changes that, okay? So I'll probably echo some of those ideas when I talk to y'all again, but here you go. This gives you guys some of that. And of course, like I said, she saw the enemy in being communism and being jazz music. Those were works of the devil, right? And so there you go.